Hi, welcome back to Adventure Capital. In this episode, we talked to Josh Morton from Barrows and Tents, the only nationally distributed American-made craft ginger liqueur. Josh started making this ginger liqueur in his garage, mostly for friends and family. Eventually, he turned it into a business growing at a rate of 80% year over year when he launched on Wefunder and raised $302,000 from 556 investors in 2016. Keep listening to hear more about Josh's story with Barrows and Tents and how he's grown ever since.
So Josh, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Great to have you here today. And maybe you could get us started by just telling us a little bit about Barrows and Tents.
So Barrows and Tents is a ginger liqueur, and I started the company about 6 years ago now. It was a product that I was making for my friends for 10 years plus before that. And right now we're in pretty much all 50 states, or available in all 50 states. We're not necessarily sold in all 50 states right now. We're like 48, 47. And we just opened a tasting room in Brooklyn, New York, which is where we're made, where we make everything. It's all small batch, all done by hand, and we're having a lot of fun with our tasting room.
Nice. And maybe take us back to the start. You mentioned, how did you get started on it?
So I was making barrows for my friends. It was just a hobby. And I was actually making liqueurs in general. I was making limoncello, and then I was making blood orange, and horseradish, and rosemary, and grapefruit, and stumbled upon ginger, and my friends really enjoyed that. So I started making more of the ginger and less of the others, and eventually just refined it down to just straight ginger and nothing else, and did that for quite a while. And was having dinner parties, etc. And after the dinner party, we would serve it straight, or actually on over crushed ice, as a little digestif. Never made a cocktail with it or anything like that. And had a child, and as part of that, had less dinner parties. And one of our friends who really enjoyed the ginger was complaining because she wasn't getting her ginger fix because we weren't having dinner parties as often. And so she went to the store and bought every ginger liqueur she could find and was completely unsatisfied. And because of that experience, she then said I should turn it into a product because there was nothing like it on the market. And I ignored her for a while because I didn't know anything about the liquor business and didn't know anything about how to start a company, start a liquor brand, all the regulations and all that. And she kept pushing, recruited my wife and a bunch of my friends. They actually threw a party for me, or at a party, they had my stuff and they had every other commercial one. And there were a lot of people I didn't even know at this party, and they did a blind tasting, and everyone to a person preferred what I was making over what they could get in the stores. So after that, I kind of couldn't ignore it. In the beginning, your friends tell you, oh, this is great. You're like, oh, that's nice. They're being flattery. But when you do a blind taste test with a bunch of strangers, it kind of makes it stick. And so then the laws in New York State had changed to make it easier to open your own distillery. So that's what I did. And within 7 months, we had gotten notice from a large company that had national distribution, Seralis USA, which does Don Q rum. And we partnered up with them, and they took us out to the rest of the country.
Wow, that is an awesome story. I'm curious, how did you know how to make this liquor? Were you just some kind of liquor prodigy, or was it a hobby for a while? How did you develop these recipes that are so much better than things that exist, that existed at the time? Talk to us a little bit about that.
So I actually had the good fortune of having a friend who was a chef, and he had been in Italy cooking and learned how to make limoncello, which is not a complicated thing to do. And if you've ever been to Italy and had limoncello over there, it's usually made by the owner of the restaurant, and it's amazing. And if you've ever had limoncello in the United States from a bottle, it's not. And so I had the experience of being in Italy and having limoncello and loving it, and then trying to have it here, and it was horrible. And so I was very excited to be able to make my own, so I could have it. And so he taught me how to do it. And then he said you can do variations on it, similar process with maceration and of alcohol and flavorings. And so that's where I came up with the ginger. And the difference between ginger and lemon is that you can do things differently. Like with lemon, with citrus, you have to add some sort of stabilizer. You have to add some sort of preservative. Otherwise, it will go bad on you. And that's why all the limoncello that's over in Italy is so lovely, because it's all handmade, and then they just keep it in the fridge and they make it, it's not having to get shipped over here and sit in a warehouse and worry about all the crazy stuff involved with that. And so they can make it fresh without preservatives. And so when I was making the ginger liqueur, we do not filter it. We actually we rack it like a wine, so there's actual still fresh ginger particles in the bottle. And because of that, and the level of alcohol that's in it, and because it's ginger as opposed to citrus, it doesn't have an issue with degrading over time. So we don't actually have to put any preservatives in it, and we can actually keep that fresh flavor as if you made it yourself in the bottle.
Got it.
But it's a pain in the butt. That's why no one else does it this way, because it's a lot of work and it's tricky to do. And most people before us, they would just use some sort of ginger flavoring or a ginger extract, as opposed to doing a cold maceration like we do. And if you add heat to ginger, it affects the flavor as well. So there's lots of different ways to do it, but we don't have any heat in our. It's basically a cold pressed ginger liqueur, which is why it's so tasty.
Got it. Yum. Yeah, it sounds delicious. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you made the decision, your friends basically pulled the business out of you, and you decided, okay, this is something that I'm actually going to go for. What was that thought process like, and how did you take, I guess step one was making it for your friends. How did you take step two, where you were like, okay, I'm going to scale up, I'm going to start distributing this? What did that look like for you?
Well, so this is where I had an interesting kind of experience, in that I really thought, because I had no experience in the liquor business, that was going to be a big issue. And it definitely would have helped if I had a lot of experience previously in the liquor industry. But what I didn't realize is that my other experience, in that I was consulting for small businesses for 20 years, running my own business for 20, 25 years, whatever it was. That experience was actually probably more valuable than not having any liquor experience. And I didn't realize that until a year or two later, when I was at an event with a bunch of other fellow liquor entrepreneurs that had experience in the business but had never run their own business. And they were all stressed about the standard things that you have when you're running your own business, and the fact that everything's on you and it's crazy hours and all this sort of stuff. And I didn't even realize that those were issues, because I'd been living that life for 20 years. So that was just normal for me. And so I think the notion of, well, how do I do this? I don't know how to do it. Well, you figure it out. And if you've ever run your own business, there's all sorts of situations you get into where you've never done it before, and you need to figure it out, and you learn either how to find things on the internet, or how to network to get to a person who's an expert, and get information from them, and other ways of doing things. And actually, one of the really wonderful things about the partnership with Soralis was, when I partnered up with them, I instantly got that industry knowledge, because they've been around for, it's a 6th generation distillery, so they've been around for a long time.
One thing I'm interested in, Josh, is how did you, I guess, the emotions of making that decision to throw yourself into it. You have these dinner parties, your friends tell you it's amazing. You kind of think they're just saying that because they're your friend, but then you do the blind taste test and everyone chooses yours. But you're this liquor prodigy, as Katie put it. I like that phrase. You should probably brand yourself as that going forward. Josh Morton, liquor prodigy. But there must have been a decision when you're like, okay, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to, that's a huge financial risk. It's a huge, like, you're vulnerable. You're putting yourself out there. Like, talk us through that process. It sounds like you had a kid as well, so it's that's like someone who's depending on you. Can you talk a little bit about the emotions and the decision, the journey you went through there?
Yeah, I think having been involved in startups before, it was something that wasn't foreign to me, and I had learned there's a great it's not really a book, it's a booklet. I mean, it's like 80 pages. And it's one of the few business books that I've read. It's called Action Trumps Everything. It's by these Babson professors. I don't even know if you can find it. It's like a PDF online. And I didn't even finish reading the book because I just got into doing, which was the thesis of the book.
That sounds like the idea of the book. The authors were probably very happy that you didn't finish the book and you started doing so.
And basically, their whole thesis is, in terms of action trumps everything, is you can spend forever writing a business plan, but it pretty much 90% of it's going to go out the window once the rubber hits the road. And so what you want to do is you want to start getting out there as quickly as possible in bite-sized chunks, things that you can do that to test your ideas and iterate. So this actual book, I think, might have been written pre-internet, but it was definitely early internet days, and it wasn't specifically focused on an online business, whereas an online business is much easier, with your website to just iterate, but when you actually have a physical product, it's a little more challenging to do that. And so, but one of the things that I took that approach, and with the change in the laws, I was able to get the business started for very low, a very small investment. And in the beginning, I was the only employee, and I was still doing my day job. So I basically do my consulting. I'd finish up there. I'd come home and have dinner with my wife and son. And then I would go to my production facility at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night, and I would make a batch till 3, 4 in the morning, and then I'd go home and do it all over again. And then the next day I'd be out, after dinner, I'd run around and go to bars and try and introduce my product to bartenders and that sort of stuff. So the nice thing about the way the changes in law, and it used to be $40,000 or $60,000 to get a distillery license, and that dropped to about $1,000 for a small batch distillery license. So I was able to get a license for not a lot of money, and then I was able to self-distribute. And previously, you had to work with a distributor, so you would have had to invest all this money, and then you would have to make the product, and you have to go to the distributor and say, will you take my product? And they could shut you down. And so with this, you were actually able to self-distribute, so I could go and see if anyone liked it. So for a small investment, I was able to test whether or not it had any market, it was going to work in the marketplace. And the interesting thing was, my original plan was to go to all the high-end cocktail bars in New York City, EO, Clover Club, Death and Company, all the sort of famous places, because everyone said, oh, that's the place you got to go. And, those are the tastemakers, etc. And I walked into Clover Club when I was first starting out. I don't even think I was in the market legally yet. Maybe I was, like a week in. It was super early. And a friend of mine happened to know the owner, Julie Ranier, socially, not through the industry, actually she's from Hawaii, and he had friends in Hawaii, and it was sort of a Hawaii connection. And he was not comfortable introducing me to her at all, because it was a friend thing and he didn't want to mix the friend business thing. Mm-hmm. So we're just sitting at the bar having a drink and talking about, the launch and everything. And one of her bartenders overhears our conversation and asks if he can taste the product. So I taste it for him, and then she comes over and wants to know what's going on, and she tastes it and she goes, Josh, this is great, but I'll never use it. And I was like, huh? And she's like, but don't be a dick. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? And she's like, well, a lot of times when you tell people no, they're kind of jerks about it. But the thing about this industry is it's all relationships. And just because I won't use it here because I make my own ginger syrup, and I'm going to be doing a consulting project in Westchester, and they'll never be able to make my ginger syrup the way I want them to. And if you're not a dick, I'll recommend your ginger liqueur. And so what it happened in that moment was my entire sort of approach to going out and selling got thrown out because Clover Club wasn't going to use me. EO wasn't going to use me. None of those places were going to be interested because they all make their own ginger syrup. And I was originally thinking my main competition was other ginger liqueurs. And what I learned was not so much. At least in those type of bars, it's going to be ginger syrup. But most of the places in New York City want to make nice cocktails, but they're not going to make a ginger syrup. So the opportunity there was all of a sudden all the places that wanted to make cocktails like EO, but weren't going to go through the trouble, right? Mm-hmm. And so it definitely changed. And that. But
you probably wouldn't have been able to figure out, like, you know, in a meeting room or by planning it out. To your point, like the only way you can figure that out is by kind of engaging with the customer and taking the action. It's kind of similar to the lean startup idea.
And the thing about it that's interesting for me is if that interaction hadn't happened, if I had not met Julie in that situation, if she hadn't been so brutally honest with me, and which I love her for, then I would have gone to Clover Club and gotten shot down. I would have gone to EO and gotten shot down. I would have gone to all those places and gotten shot down and go, okay, well, I don't have anything here. And I might not have gone further. But because I had that interaction and I was able to learn about, you know, the business a little bit and understand where I fit in the marketplace, then I was able to go to the right places. And so within a short period of time, I was in 70 plus accounts. The first competition we entered, we got best in class and platinum award. And then we got contacted by the folks at Seralis, and they want to take us nationally. So in terms of, I like to describe it as, you know, I started swimming out into the lake, and the next thing I know, I was in the middle of the lake, and it might as well keep going. I kind of got over my head really fast, and it became a thing where I didn't have a choice but to move forward with it. But I was very reluctant in the beginning, for sure.
Yeah, I imagine that first bit of startup capital that you raised was helpful to at least, you know, be established and be able to go out and produce at somewhat of a scale to get the samples out there. How did you raise that initial round? Was it from friends and family?
I bootstrapped it.
Got it.
I bootstrapped it. Yeah, it was pretty much the early was just straight from my savings, and that was it. It was and then a little further on, I got a loan from friends and family, and then we went to Wefunder, and Wefunder was great. We were actually supposed to be in the initial round, but because everything was so new, the recommendation that we had gotten about how to do our books turned out to be incorrect, and we didn't realize that until like 2 weeks before we were going to go live in May. And so we ended up having to do some stuff to get things presented better. It turned out that, so I was using a cash-based accounting. This is totally in the weeds. But we didn't know that was not going to be acceptable for the rules for equity crowdfunding. So we had to go back and switch our books to accrual and redo everything. And so that pushed us back a month. So we actually were after the initial, 8 or 12 companies that came out on Wefunder, we were in that second round of another 4 or 5. And so we came out a little later. I think we launched in June of that year.
Yeah. And you raised a little over 300K, I think 550 or so investors, from what I can see on the profile there. I'm really interested in learning. You're the first spirits company we've had on the podcast. And one of the things we want to do is kind of talk to, founders in the spirit sector, or the CPG sector generally about, how to run a campaign. So I'd be really interested in hearing from you quite tangibly, quite tactically, what exactly did you do to raise that $300,000 and run a successful Wefunder campaign?
To be honest, we got lucky. I mean, we were really I had done some startup contests where you pitch contests, that kind of events, networking events, and at one of them that January before we launched, I had met a writer. Who wrote about startups and equity crowdfunding and etc. And we were probably 3 months in, 2.5 months in, and we had sort of maxed out. Not maxed out, but we were a little over 30,000 in our raise, and we were sort of barely going up at that point. I thought we were going to get a lot more traction from the industry, but it turns out that the idea of equity crowdfunding, especially then and probably still to this day, is a little more complicated than I thought it was. And especially for an audience of bartenders and sales reps and that sort of stuff, it wasn't something that they really got their heads around so much. They understood Kickstarter, but considering it's alcohol, you can't give them a bottle because it's not legal. They didn't understand quite exactly how it worked. So we were expecting, to get a lot of love from the bartender community and the distributor community, and we didn't get a lot there. So we were kind of stuck at this $30,000, $35,000 range. And then the folks from Early Investing, they do a newsletter, and they did a feature about us. And within 48 hours, 24 hours, I can't even remember, we hit, originally we were going to raise 100,000, and within 24 hours of them sending out their newsletter, we were well over 100,000, and we were off to the races. The whole internet hockey stick phenomenon that they all talk about, that was the first time I had experienced it in person. It was amazing. On my phone, got notices every time we got an investment, and it just blew up. That day, it was like every 10 minutes there was a new investor, and it was so fun. And then we had to resubmit with to go above 100,000, and once we sort of got that base, then the Wefunder community kicked in, which was really fun, and then it fed on itself. And so then we just ran it from there and got up to the 300,000 within a matter of.
Yeah, and just to be explicit on that, so you launched with $107,000 maximum, which is the maximum you can raise without the financials being reviewed by an independent CPA. Then once you pass that number, then you got the CPA review, which allowed you to increase the max to, and then you raised the 300K. Is that right?
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it was also new
so
at the time. We didn't know if we were going to, get to 100,000 or not, and we didn't want to invest the extra money in the accounting costs if we weren't going to get there.
So basically, just advice to entrepreneurs running Wefunder campaign: be lucky.
Yes, exactly.
I'm interested. Well, go ahead.
My brother has a saying. It's not his, but he likes to say it. Luck is the residue of good design, and so if you can cultivate press opportunities before you do your Wefunder campaign, and so that when you launch, you can get some press around it, it's definitely worth doing. Another thing on the liquor side, I mean, we have a tasting room now, and if we had a tasting room when we did our Wefunder campaign, it would have been so much easier because we could have promoted the hell out of it from everyone walking in the tasting room. And we have a lot of people who come in and love the tasting room, love the product, get super excited and want to be more involved. And it would have been a really easy way to do it. So I know I've seen other Wefunder campaigns for breweries and distilleries that have physical presence. And I know that they're a big part of their strategy was around promoting it within their local tasting room.
Absolutely. Yeah, we had a dinner with Seven Steels, which is a brewery and distillery here in San Francisco recently, and they really followed that model. They have physical spaces, and we're really kind of promoting the raise to folks that were there in person. Well, hey, now you have the tasting room. If you want to do round number 2 down the line, you know where to come. Well,
the other thing, and this is I'm not a paid spokesman for Wefunder, but I have to say that the other thing we got lucky about was picking the right platform, because I had some other people I knew who chose other platforms, and the only money they got was really from the people that they brought to those platforms, whereas the Wefunder platform then and now is really vibrant. There's a lot of people on it, and so the investors that you're getting are not just people who you bring to the platform. They're actual people on the platform that really are looking to invest in startups. And Wefunder did a great job, promoting and marketing and helping us set up our page and all the rest of it. So I definitely, it wouldn't have worked on another platform. I guarantee.
Well, thank you, Josh. The $20 bill is in the mail on its way to you.
Do I have to submit an invoice?
And Finra, if you are listening, that was a joke. Okay. What about, so one thing we're always really curious in learning about is kind of examples or anecdotes of where you've kind of benefited from the Wefunder campaign beyond the capital. Are there any cool stories like that where, your investors have become customers?
This was probably our biggest disappointment with the experience. So we were ecstatic to raise a lot more money.
By the way, the $20, it's like, forget it. It's over.
So I really thought that we would have the ability to leverage the 550 investors in a way that they would help promote the brand and grow the brand more significantly. And what we found was, although we had 2 or 3 investors who went to the local liquor store, bought a bottle, posted about it on social media, told their friends, which is what we wanted, and we did some outreach to them. In general, most of the investors were passive, and they weren't really interested in getting engaged on that level. We did send out a whole kit with recipe cards and stickers and things like that to try and get some engagement. And part of it is probably we haven't done a good enough job with that process. But what we found were people they were busy doing their thing, and they liked the product and they liked the investment, but getting them to get outside their comfort zone and go and talk to a restaurant owner and that they knew, or go to the local liquor store and etc. was a step too far for us. And so that was a bit of a disappointment. We didn't get no response from it, but I was expecting a much larger engagement from the community, and we tried to create some programs around it, but we were just not getting a lot of feedback.
Interesting. So, good to hear. Well, not great to hear, but thanks for being transparent about that.
Yeah. And maybe it's just we didn't do a good job with it. So I don't know. It could be us. It's possible.
Yeah, we ask these 2 questions to everybody at some point in the podcast. Do you have any lessons, and maybe it could be this, but any lessons about an entrepreneur who's going to be using Wefunder in the future, or who's thinking about doing equity crowdfunding, and then a general lesson for somebody who's looking to start a startup? And it'd be great if it could be geared towards somebody who's making a physical product like you did.
So I would say, well, we made a couple of mistakes. One was that I was very concerned with the deal terms, and so we made them very investor friendly. And we were an LLC, which we didn't think was going to be a problem. And when we were talking to Wefunder about it, they had it was the first time everyone had done all this. So unfortunately, you weren't in a position to give advice, and we didn't know what we were doing. And so we did an LLC where we did shares in the LLC, and all of a sudden I had 550 partners, and also my tax return was 5,000 pages, and it was kind of a nightmare. So we actually we changed our filing status. We're still an LLC, but we file as a C corp now. So from tax purposes, we don't have that issue. And so if you are an LLC and you're on Wefunder, I would highly recommend doing a SAFE or doing a convertible note so that you don't have that issue. And if you're a corporation, then it doesn't matter. But I also think that people aren't as focused on the deal terms. So a SAFE is not something that you're going to get pushback from. Whereas with sort of larger investors, they may not be comfortable with a SAFE as a structure. So that was one of the things that I would definitely give advice to and have given advice to about just this deal structure. It's sort of under the,
really good advice.
In the weeds a little bit, but it would have saved me a ton of time and money and energy if I had known that going in. So that's my recommendation. And then the other thing is really important is when you are launching, to make sure you have a series of stories and things that you can put out after you do your launch to promote that launch. So you should have a calendar for the first 2, 3, 4 months after you launch of things you're going to post on the Wefunder platform, things you're going to post on social media, et cetera, to promote not just your raise, but also things you're doing in your business that are exciting and interesting that are going to get people to want to invest in your company. And we didn't do a great job with that one either. But luckily for us, we had done the seeding with the press. So we were able to have that happen for us. But I know the folks from Avo Cachaça who did a raise with you guys. It was quite successful. I think they're on their second raise with you now. Not sure. And they were very good at that in terms of having things lined up where they knew they were going to be launching in a new state a month after they did their thing, and they knew they were going to be coming out with a new product, and et cetera, et cetera. And so they had continuing things that they could present that were exciting to people and made the raise successful.
And what
Nice.
about the advice for an entrepreneur who's starting up, maybe especially in the spirit sector?
I was doing a store tasting, and this woman came over to me and was telling me about her husband who made some, I don't know if it was liqueur or some homemade spirit, and she was trying to encourage him to turn it into a product. And I asked him 2 questions, and I think I ended it right there. I asked him if he liked sleep, and I asked him if he liked money, to which he answered yes to both. And I said, well, then you probably shouldn't get into the spirits business, because I'm 6 years in, and it's a really hard business. There's a lot of competition. There's a lot of issues around distribution. You're highly removed from your customer. There's a lot of big companies with a lot of big money that's throwing their weight into it. So it's definitely not something to go into lightly. The tasting room that we just opened is doing really well, and that's going to really help us. So definitely, if you're going to go in and you can do that with your product, I highly recommend it. It also allows you to do things where you can get that direct consumer interaction and really learn from your consumers in terms of what they like.
That's a much bigger CapEx investment up front, though, I guess.
Yep.
Right. I mean, you I guess weren't able to, or like didn't want to kind of bite that bullet for a few years until you had traction and demand and a brand in the market. So I guess that's kind of tougher for folks to do out the gate.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very different business model. You're kind of really opening a bar restaurant, or just bar, depending on how you structure it. And so there's a lot more capital involved with that. And the reason originally I didn't do it was because I didn't want to have that responsibility. And also, I didn't see how a tasting room would work with a single product. In that most tasting rooms you go to, a distillery will have, they do a gin, a vodka, a bourbon, a rye, et cetera, et cetera. So they'll have 5 or 6 different spirits at least that you're tasting through. And with us, we had just the one. And so we're in Industry City, which is in Brooklyn, New York, and we've been here for 6 years. And when we first moved in, it was just a straight warehouse space. And a year after we moved in, not even, probably 6 months, Jamestown Properties became a partner in it, and they developed Chelsea Market and Ponce City Market and in Atlanta. I don't know if you're familiar with either of those places.
I know.
But basically, they were warehouse spaces that got converted into light manufacturing with retail. So usually around food, but other things. And so then Industry City is 4 times, I want to say this. It's like 6 or 8 times the size of Chelsea Market and 4 times the size of Ponce City Market. It's 6.6 million square feet. It's 16 buildings. It's huge. And so they came in here and wanted to do the same thing. And as a result, at the time, we didn't have any customer-facing part of our business. So we got moved to the 4th floor and it's sort of out of the way, which was fine for 4 years. But then there was an opportunity to move to the 1st floor, which when we're shipping out 2,000-pound pallets, having to not deal with a freight elevator and go straight out to the loading dock was a huge desire of mine. And so their idea was to create Distillery Row, which is where we are now. And to be down here, I needed to open a tasting room. So they basically forced me to open a tasting room. And it was really an afterthought for us. We moved down. I carved out the smallest amount of space possible for it and didn't really know what it was going to be until we were in the space and we were slowly we were building out the bar itself. And that's when I realized because our stuff mixes with everything, it would be a great showcase for how Barrows and Tents is used in the real world. And as such, when I started to figure out, okay, one of the things with a tasting room is I can only use spirits that are distilled in New York State with New York State agriculture. And so when I started to look at making a gin cocktail, what New York gin am I going to use? Well, I'm friends with all the New York distillers. So if I use Brian's stuff, Alan's going to be mad at me. And if I, what about Brad's gin? And what about, etc. So all of a sudden I went from, maybe I'll have 1 or 2 gins to I have 24 gins now. I have 26 bourbons. I have 160 different New York spirits representing over 35 different distillers. And it's the largest selection in New York spirits anywhere that I know that you can have by the glass or by the bottle. And Amazing. So the idea behind the tasting room shifted from you come in and you have a taste of ginger liqueur to you come in and you have a taste of ginger liqueur, and then you have this opportunity to experience all these other New York spirits, either individually in flights or in cocktails with our ginger liqueur. So we do an adult iced coffee where we use a espresso vodka that's made on Long Island, and we use a bourbon cream that's done up in Rochester. And we do that with our ginger liqueur and some cold brew, and that's phenomenal. And then we do a bourbon and rye drinks with New York's bourbon and rye, and we do gin cocktails and vodka cocktails. The only thing that we can't do are rum and tequila because sugarcane and agave are not grown in New York State. So
Awesome.
The tasting rooms turned out to be great. We love it, but it was definitely not the original reason why I wanted it to be in this space was so I had easy access to the loading dock.
So if you're listening and you're anywhere in Industry City in Brooklyn, get down to Barrows and Tents tasting room. Sounds like there's the best selection of New York liquors that's out there. For
sure. And we do a frozen mule. That is that's one of our signatures. People have been seeking us out for that because it's so tasty. So yeah, please come on down. We'd love to have you.
Josh, one last question. Barrows and Tents. I always thought kind of a weird name. What's the origin story of the name? So Barrow is the street I live on in New York City. So that's where the Barrow and Intense, just like intense flavor?
That's one of the things. That's what most people think. My wife says it's because it's my personality. But I like to think it's because of the flavor. And actually, we're very intense about ginger and our process. If you come to the tasting room, you meet our production staff. They take it really seriously, and we get in hundreds of pounds of ginger. We hand wash every piece, trim it, grind it up. I mean, it's definitely a hands-on experience, and there's no corners being cut, and we want to make sure every bottle's right. So you could say we're intense about our product.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It's always great to learn a little bit more about a beverage business because, being in San Francisco, we get a lot of exposure to tech companies and different apps and things. And so, really enjoyed the conversation. And I'm actually from New York, so I look forward to checking out the tap room next time I'm home. Sounds really, really fun.
Yeah, I'd love to have you out.
Adventure Capital is brought to you by your fundraising team here at Wefunder, which consists of Johnny Price, Katie Powers, and myself, Oliver Foyahan. We'll be sharing the adventures of one of our Wefunder founders every other week. If you have any comments, ideas, suggestions, or would just like to find out more about Wefunder or our founders, don't hesitate to contact us at hello@wefunder.com. We'll see you next time.